What's happening, everybody? It's Sean with Reactions to the Classics, and today we got another Toto reaction, a top 10 of their deep cuts, really top 10 plus one. Deep cuts from 1978 to 1982, brought to us by a friend, longtime supporter, patron of the channel, and dare I say Toto super fan? I don't think that's too much. Joseph. Thank you, Joseph. Always appreciate you. Appreciate all the things that all the patrons bring. We wouldn't be able to do this channel without you. If you'd like to help us out, check out the Patreon link below or the patron link on the end screen. So as we jump into this, Joseph gave me a absolutely fantastic write-up that I'm going to use for this because I definitely could not do better than this. He says, as promised, threatened back when I presented my helpful and illuminating top 10 lead vocalist list, that is up on the channel. Here's a deep dive into a specific era, namely their first, what might be called the Bobby Kimball years, though of course he only sang around 50% of the material from this era. I didn't want to be hampered by the fact that this period of Toto history contains 2/3 of their dozen US hits, so for this I'm ignoring all of these in favor of the deeper cuts, many of which represent the band more accurately. Anyway, it's no coincidence that many of these tracks on this list have been rotated in and out of the set list over the past 40 plus years. So before we get to the list, Joseph put a very helpful write-up in here of each album that he's pulling from, the first 4 albums. So let's do it. Toto, self-titled, 1978. Joseph gives it a 9.25. He says, a stunning debut, highly commercial sounding, but also manages to pull off the neat trick of being both cohesive and extremely varied at the same time. The band toiled over the album for 9 months in between writing, producing, and playing on other people's albums. David Paich, who was sole composer of 8 of the album's final 10 tracks, would later say of their intentions behind this album, quote, we wanted to stretch out in a way that bands from England like Yes and ELO were stretching out, and American bands weren't. But we didn't want to spend 10 years doing that just to prove we were hip and then finally get a hit record. We thought we'd reverse the process and start out with getting a hit record, let everyone know who we were, and then turn around and lay what we really felt was our hip stuff on there. The first album was also what we really felt, but it was really aimed to get a hit single off of it. Well, first single, Hold the Line, hit number 5 and went gold, while the album was a top 10 double platinum success. So mission accomplished there. Joseph says it also earned them their first Grammy nomination for Best Artist, New Artist, but they lost it to A Taste of Honey. What? Next up, we have Hydra from 1979. Joseph also gives this one a 9.25. He says darker, proggier, and heavier than the debut, but even stronger musically. Consider this the yang to the debut's yang. Jeff Porcaro later said they didn't particularly go into the studio with the intention of going in a different direction. He said if there was anything conceived about the second album was the fact we had done a tour after the first album and realized writing and production-wise we'd have to back off from a lot of things that we would do in production of an album in order to perform it comfortably. Instead of 5-part harmonies, we better stick to 3 if we're going to play it live to make those things easier. As is true for most bands, they had far less time for this follow-up effort, but Joseph says it's no sophomore slump, artistically speaking at least. Commercially, it spawned a moderate hit with the R&B infused 99, but peaked at a disappointing 37 and stopped at gold. But it did go to number 1 in Norway. Shout out to Osmond if he's watching this one. An early sign of the devotion and loyalty European audiences would show the band for the rest of their careers. Next up, we got the third album, Turn Back in 1981. Joseph gives it a 7.25. An album that has its fans, but for the most part, its reputation sees it a fair way down most people's lists of favorite Toto albums, mine included. He says, it certainly has attitude and some standout cuts, but the songwriting is less consistent. Luke gets his first sole writing credit on Live for Today, but while he would blossom as a writer soon after, it's no Don't Bother Me. Elsewhere, Paich delivers I Think I Could Stand You Forever, possibly his least inspired tune for the band ever, and the production's below par. We'll get to reasons for that for a little bit later. Well, it made it to 41, not that big of a fall from Hydra's peak, which was 37. It yielded no charting singles and disappeared from the charts within a few months, prompting panic within the band, who ultimately elected not to tour behind it, probably a good idea, and at the label who told them in no uncertain terms, the next one has to be a hit or you'll be without a record deal. Meanwhile, though, this was the album that broke them big in Japan, where it hit number 3, a feat all the remaining 80s albums would equal or better. Now we're finally up to it, Toto IV. Joseph only gives it a 7.75. Joseph says with their backs against the wall, they came up with this, the Grammy-sweeping top 5 peaking triple platinum selling behemoth that would save their career. If they hadn't made this album, it's doubtful they'd have survived to the end of 82, let alone still be a viable concern 40 years later. And yet there was a price to be paid for success, and isn't there always? They return to the commercial accessibility of the debut, but even more so by smoothing out their sound. Even the rockers here have somewhat blunted edges. The album is bookended by those two utter smashes, Rosanna and Africa. And while some misguided folk who lived through those times might think they've heard those songs enough times, I have, they still stand up as perfect records, and their enduring popularity is no surprise. But they and the album as a whole overshadow a career in which this album is something of an outlier, but it is what the average man in the street, and probably the average woman too, assumes Toto are like all the time. I'm trying not to use the word yacht here, Joseph says. Truth is, it's a fine pop rock album, but somewhat toothless by their standards, and thankfully about as representative of their catalog as for a roughly contemporaneous example, Let's Dance is a Bowie's, which is the first album I ever heard of Bowie as a 12-year-old, and I couldn't stand Bowie. I didn't know what I was missing at the time. Nonetheless, its success got their contract renewed and on very favorable terms, including complete artistic control and $1 million upfront per album. Now, I will say this, man, that's the thing. Like, we judge artists, we judge movie stars. Oh, this guy made a Marvel movie. Well, you got to pay the bills, right? So sometimes you got to make the commercial stuff so you can do the stuff you want to do. Joseph says, right at the end of the sessions, bassist David Hungate abruptly quit the band, but they had an easy replacement in middle Porcaro brother Mike, who slotted in seamlessly. What they didn't know was that soon after, they would begin their period of the revolving door of lead vocalists. But that's a tale for another time, and when this is over with, go watch the Toto top 10 lead vocalists. Lead vocalists noted individually on each song, but the lineup for all tracks here is David Paich, keyboards, vocals, Jeff Porcaro, drums, percussion, Steve Lukather, otherwise known as Luke, guitars, vocals, David Hungate, bass, remember he hadn't left yet, Steve Porcaro, keyboards and vocals, and Bobby Kimball on those vocals. Before we get into this, the music will not be in the video, but it will be in a Vimeo link below. We're going to start out with Child's Anthem, which I'm assuming you already figured out because I accidentally left a Spotify up during this whole intro. Hey, man, welcome to the filming world. This is the intro to the Toto debut album in 1978, Child's Anthem. Writer is David Paich. Lead vocals, none. It's an instrumental. Pay attention now. Joseph says you're well aware of the importance of the first song on the first album, because I talk about that all the time, right? It's the first thing that people are going to know you by. And this suitably bombastic little instrumental certainly announces Toto's musical proficiency to anyone who somehow didn't know about it already. Because if you don't know about Toto, I'm not going into the whole history of the band, but they are some of the top session musicians of all time. Like, these guys were absolutely unbelievable, and they appear on tons of things, including Thriller by Michael Jackson, the biggest selling album ever. The opening minute or so is a good illustration of how to tell which of their keyboard players is doing what. This is some deep stuff, guys. Some inside stuff. Here, and with few exceptions across their catalog, it's Paich on the organic acoustic keys. He's playing a grand piano in this case, with Steve Porcaro contributing the synthy stuff. Yes, that's a technical term for it on top. So I would say I'll have the lyrics up as always, but there's no lyrics on here. I'm paying attention too. So thanks again, Joseph. Let's check this out. All right, Child's Anthem. Really did like that. Just overall great musicianship, obviously. One of the interesting things is that the piano keyboard riff reminded me very much of the Top Gun theme, which came all the way in 1986. Maybe Harold Faltermeyer was inspired by it, but it really, really did sound like parts of that. But great way to start this top 10/11, the plus one. This is really the plus one. Now let's go to number 10. We have Manuela Run from same self-titled Toto album, 1978. Writer and lead vocals, David Paich. Child's Anthem, of course, segued nicely into the first vocal track, the minor hit, I'll Supply the Love. But we'll skip ahead over that and fellow minor chart entry, Georgie Porgy, to start our deep cut list proper with a track that inspired artist Philip Garris's cover art and the enduring emblem of the sword that recurs throughout Toto history. Notable for featuring prominently on all of their most successful releases. If only they'd used it on every album, their career might have had fewer ups and downs. That said, most of their swordless albums covers are really awful. It's a wonder anybody bought them. That was just for me, but I thought I'd throw it in there because that was good insight from Joseph. Jeff Porcaro elaborated on that album cover art in 1990. It came about when we finished recording our first album. We hired an artist from San Francisco named Philip Garris, who had done the Grateful Dead album covers from the Haight-Ashbury days, many rock and roll album covers. He came, listened to the record, went back to San Francisco, painted and brought back the famous emblem of the sword, the ring around the sword, and the ribbons. He explained that the sword, his exact words were that Toto's music had a hard edge, the first album, and it was powerful, but we did many different kinds of music. So he said it was a double-edged sword. And a song called Manuela Run says, "Don't look now, you better watch that sword that's hanging over you, the sword of Damocles." The stone ring represents a piece of work, an album, CD nowadays, and the ribbon represented the year of the child. Joseph says, I once owned a vinyl copy of a radio interview, which is a discussion we're going to have later. What? A vinyl copy of a radio interview? But We'll talk about that later, Joseph. With LA DJ Jim Ladd, conducted with Paish and Jeff shortly after Hold the Line broke big. Paish was reluctant to discuss his lyrics in great depth, but reiterated several times that in the height of the disco era, of course, he wanted the songs to be about something more other than let's get up and dance. Musically, we get our first proper Luke solo, and while it's modest compared to some yet to come, it's nonetheless impressive for a guy who had only seen out his teens earlier in the recording of the debut. On the album, the production effect of the door slam that ends the song created a hard intro into the next tune, but, spoiler alert, we'll get to that one a little later. Manuela Run, you hear at the end of the segue, obviously, into the next tune there. A really good song. I really enjoyed that, man. It doesn't have anything to do with the lyrics like "Run, Manuela, run." It's just very catchy. Don't hang your head, and all of that good stuff, or you'll be dead. It's all about the instrumentation, right? The keyboards, the drumming from Jeff Porcaro is absolutely fantastic. The keys, of course, all of it. I mean, all of it is so well done. So I actually really did enjoy that one. Next up, we got "Gift with a Golden Gun" from the Turnback album. Writers are David Paish and Bobby Kimball. Lead vocals, Bobby Kimball. Joseph says, speaking about the Turnback album in 2014, Steve Lukather said, that was our FU record. We didn't want to listen to anybody. We wanted to be a rock and roll band. The label kept putting out ballads, They put out 99 instead of White Sister. And we gradually lost our credibility at rock radio because they kept focusing on the softer stuff. We were angry about that, so we decided to get Jeff Workman, who'd worked with Roy Thomas Baker, and make an arena rock record. Jeff, God bless his soul, had a concept of the way he'd EQ everything. He took all the 1K out of everything. The guitar, bass, and drums were all basically room sound. He co-produced with us, and he brought a completely different thing, which is what happens when you hire a producer. They put their own spin on things. He'd tell us not to do things certain ways, tell us we had to do it his way. We left somebody at the reins, and that's what came out. We wanted to prove we were an arena rock band. It's probably the weirdest record we've done, certainly sonically, but we're really proud of it when it came out. As a mission statement for arena rock album, this album opener, Joseph's saying this, suits the tone perfectly. But the muddiness of the mix, especially where the guitar is concerned, also shows why the album is a controversial one in the catalog. As I noted above, unlike some bands of their era who stick year in, year out to a similar set list, Toto has always been great at pulling out deep cuts for their live shows, and this one was resurrected for their 25th anniversary tour. So turned out to be the second song I ever saw them do. The first song is also to be found further down the list. All right, "Gift with a Golden Gun." Not really much to these lyrics. I'm not going to go into that. I liked Bobby's vocals, but I thought, Luke's guitar work was the highlight of this song. But I thought the mixing on this thing was even worse on the vocals, right? Bobby sounds so washed out, especially in the first half of the song. But interesting to hear them in this manner. I don't know if I like this song or not, but I do appreciate, like I said, the guitar work. Now we're going to go to our first tune from Toto IV, "Afraid of Love," our number 8 selection here. Writers are David Paish, Luke, and Jeff Porcaro. Lead vocals by Steve Lukather. Joseph says, as you know, I always like to include a relevant quote where I can, but the best I can come up for on this track is Luke's introduction on the March 2nd, 1985 Live in Osaka bootleg. He said, "We like to do a song off our 4th album, which was written by the thrill seeker himself, the love supreme David Paish, Jeff Porcaro, and myself during the first time we saw a Chihuahua with a heart on." Guys, I don't think you're ever going to hear a quote like that again, so thank you, Joseph, for that one. Well, Luke is noted for his sophisticated sense of humor. In any case, it's a rare lead vocal for him on a rocker. He was usually the go-to ballad singer for the band at this point, and one that was a live staple for a long time. Unfortunately, it's unlikely to be heard again, as Africa aside, only Jeff Porcaro co-writes are off the menu. It's a messy business to get into, but widows with billionaires for second husbands and years of litigation are all you really need to know, and it's all you need to know. But after I read this research, I went and researched this all out. It's an interesting story, actually really a horrible story about what she did to the band, basically, but we'll leave it at that. We're here for the music. "Afraid of Love." The story goes, basically, he meets this girl and she kind of pulls him in, right? He never really thought about love, and now she's pulled him in, but he kind of sees how she is, and so he's afraid of love, right? He knows she's going to hurt him, and she doesn't really care. And I might have dated a few girls like that back in the day, maybe a long, long time ago. Boys and Girls in a Galaxy far, far away. I thought the instrumentation was fantastic. It's going to be on all of this because Toto are top flight musicians. The song itself, it's okay for me, man. I mean, it's 1982 rock standard music, right? I don't like it as much as some of the earlier stuff, but it's not horrible by any means. Next up, we have English Eyes. Writers are David Paich, Bobby Kimball, Jeff Porcaro, and Steve Porcaro. Lead vocals by Bobby. David Paich's recollection of the thinking behind the direction for Turn Back, where I remember Jeff Porcaro played me a Queen album, and we were fascinated by how it sounded. So we were looking to get into that sound that Queen had, hoping it would inspire us to write some stuff along those lines. And as you hear that album, it's a little harder rocking. It's really aimed towards those kinds of sounds, even though it's Toto music. Joseph says Paich would also acknowledge that while they, the band in general, perhaps him in particular, could come up with a great music track in their sleep, words were a lot more difficult for them, maintaining that from the very beginning they spent more time on the lyrics than anything else, and that Jeff Porcaro in particular was insistent that the lyrics should be right. Truth be told, they would improve as the years went on, especially when they started collaborating with the likes of Stan Lynch and Fee Waybill, and even Jimmy Webb on one occasion. But I bring the subject up here because while the lyrics here are generally fine, the last couplet in the final verse is so bad, I have to do my best to ignore it. It's a litany of sins, including a bad chess metaphor, rhyming the word you with the word you, and a final line that makes no grammatical sense whatsoever. Luke's riff and the dynamic shifts within the track more than make up for it, though, and that's it. I mean, I read a lot of lyrics that are nonsensical. They just sound good with the music, and sometimes that's all you need. All right, English Eyes, definitely Luke's guitar work on here is the standout. I mean, the keys are great, the drumming's great, but the guitar work is the fantastic thing here. The song is not that bad writing-wise, right? It's this girl that he met in London town. She was strange, young, and tender, and narrowed all my choices down. We ran away into the neighborhood. You carved your name right next to mine, English Eyes. The verse that Joseph's not a huge fan of, the ending, red sky, warning girl, you really put a spell on me. Never told me about the daddy you refused to please. You took the bishop when the king was standing right in front of you. There's nothing in it if I can't have a girl with eyes like you. So you get the you. And I don't know, man. You took the bishop when the king was standing right in front of you. I've heard worse lines. It's actually not all that bad. So a pretty good song there. Now we're up to number 6. You Are the Flower. Back to from the Toto debut self-titled album in '78. Writer and lead vocals Bobby Kimball. When looking at Bobby as a potential lead singer for the band, they had him come in and do a rough version of a new song Paich had just written, a little thing called Hold the Line, followed by a take of one of his own songs, as Bobby later recounted. Quote, I wrote a song about my daughter, and I had read this book called The Little Prince. It's kind of a children's book, but it's got very heavy comments about life in this book. My daughter was about a year old at the time, so I wrote this song, brought it in, and that was my audition. Paich would later confirm that the demo recording was the basic track heard on the album, which perhaps explains the oddity of the drums being in mono, with Jim Horn's flute and other horns, strings, and vocals overdubbed later, adding, quote, I thought that was such a great representation of our band that I played the cassette of that 100,000 times. Great guitar solo, and Bobby sang the blank out of it. Joseph says, a note on the ending. Originally, this side closer timed out at 4:08 and ended on a fade out. However, in recent years, it's somehow been superseded by a longer version, which gets a little messy towards the end. Cool to hear once or twice, but really not sure why it's become the definitive version. Luke has explained why certain Toto songs fade out when they do, and this bears mentioning here. He said most outros we do are loose jams, and as we don't know what's going to happen next, sometimes, and when it goes on a bit, we just sort of fall apart as we know we won't use it all anyway. I wanted that last drum in there, but of course, I should have known, right? We even talked about it. There's just a fade out in there. Almost a funky little song, right? With all that funk in there, I really did like that part of, not much to the lyrics. I always just say that, guys, because if you watch this channel, I break down lyrics a lot. There's not much to break down here, which is fine as well, because the musicianship is top notch. No different on this song. I thought Bobby's vocals were really good and really strong. He's really showing them off. But when you understand, thanks to Joseph's backstory, that this was kind of his audition, that's what you do in those things. And I can see why they kept it, because he might not have sang it the same way if he already had the job, right? So good choice there. Now we're going to get to the top half of this list. We're up to St. George and the Dragon from Hydra. Writers David Paich, lead vocals Kimball with Paich. Chances are you don't recall the epic title from the Toto lead vocalist countdown, Joseph's telling me, but this continues its lyrical themes in what has been referred to as a Prague David and Goliath story. Asked years later if this was a hint towards Toto going full-on Prague for album 2, Lukather confirmed that it had been a possibility. He said Hydra was an accidental concept piece. We never really followed through with the idea, but it's going to be a whole album. We were young. What can I say? Joseph says, a concept album with a concept that virtually disappears after the second track. Wasn't there another album like that sometime in history? Can't quite put a finger on it. I think it starts with an S, but I'll get back to you on that. In another interview, Luke added, I listened to that and I think, how high were we? I was like 20 years old when we started that record. I turned 21 while we were making that album. You listen to that stuff and you can hear the youth in it. But at the same time, we were trying to find our way. We were just experimenting and we didn't really care what anybody thought. This one would also see a revival on their 35th anniversary tour. It was captured on their Live in Poland DVD with Luke saying, we hadn't done it in so long, but it turned out to be a real crowd pleaser. We didn't want to just put out another DVD with the hit songs on it. Of course, there's certain songs you got to put on there. And there's certain songs, if I never played them again, that would be okay too. But they bought my house. And that goes back to, even though I don't care for those two songs, I get it, man. You've got to pay the bills. Joseph says, strangely enough, this is the only Kimball lead vocal on side one of the album. And even here, he merely doubles Paish's vocals in the chorus. St. George and the Dragon, little fantasy type stuff here, right? Little princess throw out here. The princess dipped in ways. Does he know I'm a soldier of fortune and not a victim of circumstance? And now his fate is sealed with my lance. And then the chorus, I can tell by the look in your eye. You've never seen the man with nothing to say. I can tell by the look in your eye. You better watch yourself. St. George is on his way. We find out he's a mighty warrior and a viper of the first degree. I've been sentenced here to slay the giant, gild this fear I cannot see. So those are your type of fantasy type of lyrics. Everybody is firing on all cylinders here as far as musicianship wise. Luke, of course, is on point, but everybody is. So enjoy the musicianship on that one tremendously. Next up from Toto IV, 1982, Lovers in the Night, coming in at number 4. Writer and lead vocals, David Paish. Speaking in 2013, he spoke of Macca's Live and Let Die having a dramatic impact on him when conceiving this track, saying, quote, I wanted to write something that not only showed off our band, but also a symphony orchestra on that record. I felt we needed to write just a regular, good old-fashioned pop rock kind of song, but then attach a symphonic, incredible instrumental section to the middle of it. It was very dramatic, and that is still, to this day, one of my favorite cuts, and Live and Let Die, one of Macca's best solo efforts, in my opinion. Lovers in the Night from Toto IV. You know, Luke saves them a lot, man, with the guitar work. I mean, I thought that the keyboard work was nice on here by David and Steve as well, but the guitar work really said it's a fine song. It's a well-produced song, you know, on a very well-produced album, which I'm figuring out now that I know 4 of the 10 songs from that album. And it's just basically the tale of the tape is getting involved with this girl who doesn't care about you once again. You know, she'll have you walk beneath the ladder you were meant to climb. I thought that was actually a pretty good line right there, you know, that she's going to take you down a bad road, but you can't get away from her because you're so into her. So, like I said, a well done song. Would it be my number 4? No, but I don't know this stuff nearly as much as Joseph does. Now we're up to number 3, Mama from the Hydra album. Writers are Paish and Kimball. Lead vocals, Kimball. Interviewed about the Hydra album in 2017, Steve Porcaro enthused about this track. Quote, I just love Mama. I just loved everything about it. I'm always trying to make an atmosphere and a vibe, and Mama definitely had it. It definitely had this vibe. Jeff is playing this unbelievable groove throughout. Paish is doing those fourths that he does, like on Georgie Porgy and stuff. That's Dave's jazz influence that is so cool. The way he implements it in there without it being like eating your jazz vegetables. You know what I mean? The way he incorporates his harmonic background as far as his jazz vocabulary, I think he does it in such a cool way in Toto. Joseph says, of course, Paish had jazz in his genes. His father, Marty, was a renowned jazz musician and arranger and still describes himself half-jokingly as a frustrated jazz piano player. There's also a hefty Steely Dan influence evidence in this cut. Asked recently about what he learned from working with the Dan, he said, they always had this cynical sense of humor. It was very funny in the studio. Jeff Porcaro and I got it. A lot of people didn't get it. I definitely got it that these are hardcore New Yorkers. They kind of wince. They looked out of the corner of their eye when they're talking about LA and stuff with a little bit of cynicism in it. But they're master musicians. I can't say enough about the impact they've made on music. They're so different than everybody else. That's what I wanted Toto to do. If you want something a little different, here's something over here. It's not necessarily better or worse than anything, but it's just a little bit different. I think Steely Dan fit that category also, although I'm not comparing ourselves to them. I was just trying to be different. That's what I learned from Steely Dan. It's a great quote there. Mama. That one was a standout for me. I thought that one was fantastic. Definitely sounded like Steely Dan. If you just pop this on and I didn't know any better, I I would tell you it's Steely Dan. Like, it's that spot on. I don't think they were trying to mimic them. They were just influenced by them. But yeah, the jazziness, just the great bass work on this, as well as obviously the keys and the guitar. But really, really well sung as well by my man Bobby Kimball. So yeah, that was fantastic. Now we're up to Girl Goodbye from that debut album, Toto, written by Page, sung by Bobby Kimball. Joseph says it's been a bit of a wait since I last referenced it, but here is that first track I saw them do live, a moment which will permanently be cemented in my brain long after I've forgotten my own name or other frivolous stuff about life. Although penned by Page, Bobby and Luke are the stars of the show here. So here are their recollections of recording it. Luke said, quote, I thought it was good until the first Van Halen album dropped. I remember Page played Eruption for me right before I did the solo on Girl Goodbye. It was like, who the F is this cat? But it inspired me. I played my 58 Gold Top, cranked in the studio, just full blast, and I blew up one of those big glass ashtrays. I remember those, man. They used to have in recording studios in the 70s. It blew up, and that was the last lick of the whole song. I hit a harmonic that I could never do again in a million years. It was a freak accident thing. Bobby said on the song Girl Goodbye, I did all the background vocals, and we triple-tracked everything. All the harmonies were triple-tracked. I sang for 16 hours. I took a break for lunch. That's about it. Wow. Joseph says, unsurprisingly, as a Bobby showcase, it was one of the first tunes brought back to the setup after his return to the band in 1999 after 15 years away. Along with, you're going to have to wait. What's that number one song? Wow, Girl Goodbye. The bass work on that was fantastic. I just got to throw that out there because I don't talk about him enough. And, he left after the fourth album, but David Hungate, so good on there. Obviously, Luke's guitar work, but all of it was just so well done. Bobby Kimball's vocals. This just had that riff, man, that infectious bass riff, and just all of it, man. All of it worked so well together. I just liked it a lot. The lyrics, this guy's in a bad way. Like he's in a bad way. This man's got a gun. I'm out on the run. Got some heat. Got a gun. If they don't find me soon, it'll be a damn pity. So it's goodbye, girl, goodbye. Girl, goodbye. It's so hard to see the truth with the sun in your eyes. Must be the way she cries. Must be in the way that she cried. But those harmonies are just, and Kimball just is fantastic. So that one, spoiler alert, will be on my faves as well. Let's see if Joseph's number one Toto deep cut from the years 1978 to 1982, the first 4 albums, is going to make my cut of favorites. We have White Sister. Writers are Page and Kimball. Lead vocals, Kimball. Earlier, there was a quote from Luke bemoaning the release of the ballad 99 over this track, but while it's a favorite of his, and indeed mine, obviously, in both cases, has been more than a little to do with his face-melting solos, yes, plural. I can't say it's ever struck me that this would have done much as a single, even with the disco era finally drawing to a close. Indeed, that the album yielded a hit at all is a bit surprising. Steve Porcaro believed that the band had gotten cocky after the success of their first album. We weren't as worried about the commercial accessibility as we were on the first album. I think we thought that whatever we would do, it would be commercially accessible because we were doing it. I think we could have been better checked. Sometimes we would go down these sort of wild directions. I think most fans and myself would look at that as a good thing. It made us kind of quirky and unique, but the album sure didn't have the impact we hoped for. As for what it's all about, Joseph says, well, nobody seems to know, but the lyrics are some of their best. Despite that, if you can manage to explain to me, that would be a neat bonus. I'm going to do my very best, if not even better than that. Steve P. did rule out White having any connection with the white lady, though, which would be your first thought, right? He said, quote, I don't think it was a cocaine thing. I think that was just us trying to come up with, and then he laughs, to write another pop tune. It's hard, It's not easy to keep coming up with girls' names or scenarios. That has got to be absolutely true. All right, number one, White Sister. White Sister, letting Jeff just hammer us out on that one. The first minute and a half of the song, I'm like, I don't think this song is going to make the cut for me. And then Luke's guitar solos came in, and yeah, it's going to make the cut. Just a really well done song. Lyricism wise, I have no idea what it's about. It doesn't really matter. They're not nonsensical or anything. It's just, do you love me, White Sister, when I play your game? So when you manipulate me and I go along with it, I don't even know what's right. I can say that you put up some kind of fight. I've been branded. I've been stranded. I'm so thankful for what I've been handed. I wish you could say that you're mine. Such a card game. So she's messing with him, and these boys got messed with girls a lot and wrote the lyrics about it, I guess, and didn't we all? So Very, very well done on that. A fitting choice for number one. Not sure it'd be my number one, but it's going to be on my honorable mentions and faves list. Did you like that segue? All right. Honorable mentions, English Eyes, great guitar there. Let me know if you've heard that before. St. George and the Dragon, also all around musicianship is on point on that. And my three faves are going to be Mama, Girl Goodbye, and White Sister, Joseph's top three. So we got those right. Actually, Girl Goodbye is probably my favorite off of here, but a really well done top 10. Appreciate Joseph cultivating all of this material and curating it. And not only that, but the absolute tremendous write-up that he gave me was great. It went a lot to understanding these songs and Toto themselves. Am I a big fan of Toto after this? No, I'm not. But I do respect them more. I do get it. And I do get the fact that you got to put out commercial stuff sometimes. You just do, man. You got to pay the bills. So let me know what you think of this one, guys. What else would you have had on here? And until next time, I will see you.